Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. Today we're going to go ahead and respond to one of Brianna Campos's, I almost said tweets, one of her TikToks where she's talking about step challenges. I just want to see what she says. It's one of the longer form TikToks. I want to get to know her better. So let's go ahead and break it down. I'm going to go ahead and watch the whole thing and then we'll break it down piece by piece.
So you don't think step challenges are healthy? Let's talk about it. I think that if we existed in a world where we didn't live a sedentary lifestyle, where our life was not necessarily designed to be seated, and I would say for a majority of people, whether we are in school or we are in a job, our jobs are sedentary. I think if we lived in a world where we also did not elevate our mobility and our exercise habits over any other health promoting behavior, I would say that sure, I think a step challenge could be a lot of fun. Could be a creative way to get in touch with what movement feels good. But the goal of, walking 10,000 steps a day is an arbitrary number. That 10,000 was a made-up number. It wasn't actually based on any science or research of how many steps a person should, quote-unquote, take a day. I think that this comment is ironic because at the end of the day, in that last video, I talk about how there are other health-promoting behaviors that have nothing to do with physical health that companies could take, but they don't. They instead only take weight loss and movement. What about a sleep challenge and encouraging people to sleep more? What about a rest challenge and encouraging people to take off PTO? What about a water challenge, encouraging people to drink more water and hydrate more? What about a friendship or community building challenge? Do you know what the best predictor of the longevity of your life is? According to a study done by Harvard, the best predictor of the longevity of your life is your social connections. Not what the scale says, not how many steps you take in a day, not even your genetics. That the best predictor of how long a life you will live is based off your social interactions. So if the challenges were truly designed for the intent of health, why do we solely and only focus on physical health? Mental, emotional, relational. There are so many other types of health promoting behaviors that are just as healthy, and all of those other things that I mentioned could be done and would not potentially trigger any person who is, especially if you live in the United States. There is a study that was done. It said that 80% of 10-year-old girls have already been on a diet. They reported to being more afraid of becoming fat than they were to cancer, war, or losing both of their parents. If we as a culture don't get our shit together, we are going to be breeding up a whole new generation who's going to develop a relationship with food and body and movement and not mean that I am a less valuable person, that I will be discriminated against, that I deserve to be discriminated against. Then sure, do your fucking movement challenge. But if the movement challenge is still somehow rooted in a mobile body is more better, a healthier body is better, a person in a smaller body is better, we are just perpetuating, hiding it under the guise of health. I'll go with the belief that this question was asked in good faith. There is nothing wrong with wanting to improve or add more movement. But if your movement is tied to your self-worth, your self-esteem, or your value to this world, as well as your health status or your body size, I'd argue that your step challenge isn't healthy.
Oh my God. Okay, so I take it her goal is to educate people about the toxic ritualistic world. I don't think that she's necessarily doing it in the way she thinks. She's showing a very good example of the mental gymnastics, the bizarre belief system, the magical beliefs about size and step challenges and whatever else that go into the toxic ritualistic world, as well as the projection onto everybody. That was one hell of a rant. So we are going to have to break it down, definitely piece by piece. And I noticed some contradictions right away, or some issues with what she was saying right away. So let's go ahead and watch it.
So you don't think step challenges are healthy? Let's talk about it. I think that if we existed in a world where we didn't live a sedentary lifestyle, where our life was not necessarily designed to be seated, and I would say for a majority of people, whether we are in school or we are in a job, our jobs are sedentary. I think if we lived in a world...
What does it have to do with anything, though? What does having a sedentary lifestyle have to do with a step challenge? What is that even saying? What does that even mean? What are you saying? Like, she doesn't actually make a point there. She's just saying, if this. So this is something that happens a lot. She's really pointing out a lot of the nuances within the toxic ritualistic. So when it comes to this, people will often, she's a very good example. She did this in the video I did yesterday. They will often create these hypothetical situations where it would be okay to get their health under control, or this like weird dreamland thing that is unrealistic, that won't happen, or that's not necessarily going to change immediately. So for example, people having a sedentary lifestyle, with the way that work is structured, school is structured, all these different things, she's saying that if that were to somehow change overnight, then she would take part in this, or it would be okay to do so. That's specifically being stated so that it will never change. It's the idea is to discourage you to do it, because it's to say, if this impossible thing were to happen, then it would be okay for you to do it. That's reinforcement. How is it reinforcement? Because she's discouraging you from doing something that could potentially help you downsize. That's discouragement. It's toxic ritualistic reinforcement. She might be the queen of this. I haven't seen it to this level. This is really wild. Let's go ahead and continue.
Where we also did not elevate our mobility, and...
That's subjective. Who's we? You don't. Are you included in the we?
Our exercise habits over any other health promoting behavior.
That's not necessarily everybody's feelings about it. Most people have something like a step count. It is within a list of other things that they're doing. It's not that important to people. It's just something that they're looking at. I don't personally have a step goal. I don't, but I have an active job and I walk a lot. I just like to walk. So I don't really worry about it. I pace a lot. I walk around plenty. I don't like resting that much. I don't. I do force myself to, one day a week, I force myself to physically rest because I need to. But for a long time, I was very restless. You know, I was actually restless. It was difficult for me to rest. Now I can actually rest, but I do enjoy moving around. I enjoy it. I always have. My mom always said, like, when I was young and when I was a kid and a baby and stuff, like, I was running everywhere. I was walking everywhere. Like, I was busy. I like to move. I still like to move. Does that mean that I'm putting it above everything else or whatever? It's like, no, this could just be a personality trait. That why should you not take part in movement? Why should you not take part in walking if you just like walking? What is her problem? If you want to hit a certain goal, what does it matter? What's it to her? Why is it her business? She wants to discourage that because she wants to reinforce. That's the point.
I would say that, sure, I think a step challenge could be a lot of fun. It could be a creative way to get in touch with what movement feels good. But the goal of, walking 10,000 steps a day is an arbitrary number.
It doesn't matter. People can have different goals. Who cares? It's arbitrary for you to say not to. I think she tries to use a lot of like emotional based arguments, or that's not real, or that's not real, when a lot of what she says is also not real. Arbitrary this, arbitrary that. It's arbitrary to not do it. Who cares?
10,000 was a made up number. It wasn't actually based on any science or research of how many steps a person should.
It doesn't have to. A physical challenge doesn't have to be based on research and science. It can just be a physical challenge for the sake of being a physical challenge. I know that that's a very strange concept for you, but that's very normal to a lot of people. A lot of people enjoy this type of stuff. There's this whole industry called sport and sports. I don't know if you recognize that, but people enjoy it. People enjoy moving and doing things. You may not be able to relate to that, but I don't know why you're projecting your complete lack of enjoyment of any movement whatsoever. Why are you projecting that onto other people? That doesn't make sense. If somebody told me I want to do a 10,000 step a day challenge, I'd be like, okay, go for it. See how it goes. It doesn't matter. And the fact that she tries to make the connection to E fall by the letter D is wild. It has nothing to do with the amount that you're having. It has nothing to do with it. She's making a connection that doesn't even exist. There are people who walk 10,000 steps and they eat like hogs after. It has nothing to do with it. It's a totally different topic. It's so irrelevant. It's really crazy.
Quote unquote take a day.
But part of the toxic ritualistic is that you don't want to exercise because ultimately, this is the tea, sis. So I will actually say why people don't want to and why she's discouraging it. Because when you exercise a lot, or when you actually move, go to the gym, lift weights, do this stuff, it changes your appetite. Why? I think in particular, like weightlifting and stuff, it affects your dopamine levels and things like that. It makes a more dopaminergic brain, which it changes your appetite. Your appetite isn't as high, which she doesn't want. Oh, I can't enjoy food as much if I exercise, so I just won't. That's where it comes from. She might not recognize that. It might be a subconscious thing. It doesn't really matter though. The effect is still there. But that's exactly why I encourage exercise. I always have encouraged exercise on this channel, even when people have been upset with me and said, well, I can't do this or I can't do that or whatever. I say, do what you can do. You think it was easy for me when I started? It wasn't, but I still did it. Do what you can do. I was very limited when I started. But over time, and especially over years of being active, and I'm talking years, people don't think about years of activity. It regulates your appetite, particularly through regulating glucose metabolism, which is very obvious if you think about it. It makes sense. Duh. You have energy going in and out of muscles and stuff. It changes things. It improves. So you don't have as high of an appetite. That's just from exercise alone. That's why she doesn't want you to do a 10,000 step, because it could affect your appetite over a long period of time. And that's why she wouldn't want to do it, because she wouldn't want that to go down. Now, it doesn't happen instantly. I don't want people to think, oh, if I just do this now, it'll happen. No, it takes a long time. Like, think of it at least a year or 2 years, you know. But having an active lifestyle, it's just better. I don't know. It just is. You feel better. You think better. It gives you motivation to have other healthier habits through the dopamine release, makes you more focused on your goals. It's just better, especially if you guys, I mean, a lot of you guys that have ADHD, you guys know, because you guys have told me that exercise really helps. It helps an average person too. And it certainly helps an obese person. So, especially class 1, I will say, especially class 1. So she doesn't want you to, because it kind of unlocks these different aspects and these different things. She wants you to just be a flop. So she's like, no, just be flop like me. Be a flop like I am. And that, which it could be jealousy, could be toxic ritualistic comparison. So she's comparing herself to other people. So she wants to make those differences different or, better for her. Or it could be she's just reinforcing. Maybe she's just reinforcing in herself. She's justifying why she isn't active. But the reality of it is because if she was more active, especially over the long term, she wouldn't be able to eat as much. That's why she doesn't want to do it. That's why you don't do it when you're in it.
I think that this comment is ironic because at the end of the day, in that last video, I talk about how there are other health promoting behaviors that have nothing to do with...
Doesn't matter. This isn't an argument. Why wouldn't you just encourage people to do all of them? You don't use other health promoting behaviors to cancel out another one. That doesn't make sense. Exercise is healthy. It's a good thing. I'm going to keep saying it. And I know it really pisses off people with this issue. They hate it when you say that. Because why? Because of what I told you. Because over time it curbs your appetite. So they don't want to hear it. They want to struggle. They want it to be painful. They want it to be horrible. They want it to be impossible. That's why you have people like Anna O'Brien. She runs, she injures herself so that she can stop. She does those surgeries so she cannot move. So she has a reason not to. And ultimately, the underlying goal is to have an increased appetite, which it will cause. It does. Your brain isn't as stimulated if you're not moving, and you seek physical stimulation. It's a very dopaminergic thing to exercise. It has a lot to do with that. So if you throw that out, then your brain is so much less stimulated. So you're going to want certain foods and certain things that increase dopamine, which means that you'll want to eat more, which means you can engage in the toxic ritualistic more. It isn't normal or natural to be completely stagnant. Always do what you can. I'm not here to shame or judge somebody who has an issue or who is disabled or anything like that, but just do what you can. It will help you. That's all. Everybody do their best. Don't injure yourself. I'm really against injury. Don't do that. But do what you can. Anything helps. And for a lot of people, especially people that are really big, they can walk. So that step goal could help, because that's something within reach. And at a certain size, walking is a really good exercise. I'm not there anymore. It's not really enough for me. I consider walking to be like breathing. It's just a part of life. It's like just brushing my teeth and breathing. Like it's just whatever at this point. But for a while, it was a workout for me. And there's no shame in that.
Physical health that companies could take, but they don't. They instead only take weight loss and movement. What about a sleep challenge and encouraging people to sleep more What about a rest challenge and encouraging people to take off?
So, as far as rest, a lot of people rest too much, especially on a physical level. I don't think that there's necessarily a physical rest crisis going on in the United States. Oftentimes, when you are physically active, your mental stress takes a break because there's, again, that physical stimulation going on within the body. So you don't think as much about stressful things internally. You can still think about it, but it's just different because there's kind of a distraction piece going into it. So obviously you don't want to overdo it and you don't want to like injure. Again, I'm very against injury. So be careful, but I'm just saying like it can help you create mental rest when you're physically moving because you spend a lot of brain activity on the actual movement. So it's a good distraction from other problems and you can feel better after.
What about a water challenge?
Especially remember over years of time. So think about it. If I were to take working out seriously for 2 years, how will my brain change? Think of it that way. Don't think of these instant results. It's not necessarily that like that.
Encouraging people to drink more water and hydrate more. What about a friendship or community building challenge? Do you know what the best predictor of the longevity of your life is? According to a study done by Harvard, the best predictor of the longevity of your life is your social connections.
So this is fascinating to me because so much of fat acceptance, they talk about how awful they're treated socially for being fat. So you need to kind of pick a lane. Is being fat horrifically awful for your social connections, or is being fat okay for your social connections, therefore your longevity? I don't necessarily disagree or agree. I think obviously a layered approach is best. I don't think it's great to be in social isolation, but to act like it would be great to be 400 pounds or that having friends is going to cancel out being 400 pounds, they're just not related. She's doing this thing where she's conflating everything with weight, which is another aspect within the toxic ritualistic. It has nothing to do with it.
Not what the scale says, not how many steps you take in a day, not even your genetics.
It has nothing to do with any of that. What does any of that have to do with a 10,000K step challenge? It's so far from it. But in her mind, she thinks 10,000K step challenge equals E followed by the letter D equals everything else that I justify and think about in regard to my issue. So she thinks, oh, I don't have to worry about my weight because I have friends. But also your movement tells people that it's horrible and you're oppressed and people treat you terribly for being that size. You can't use that argument then because according to y'all, it's the worst thing ever to be fat. You're treated terribly for being fat. So then it would mess up your social connections. And if you're acting like it's the most important thing in the world to have these social connections, then that means that you would have to lose weight even just for social reasons, which is that is E followed by the letter D. That is toxic ritualistic. So you're literally reinforcing it in people, and you're reinforcing it in people subtly on the reductive side too. You're doing both. You're doing like a twofer. You're doing it all. Because you're saying, oh, the social connections are everything. And somebody that has those issues is going to hear that and say, but being fat, it's the worst thing socially ever. So that means I really have to do something. You see, and it can be crazy because when we lose physical reality, which again, exercise can be very grounding, especially for somebody who has binge, because you tend to ignore the body and that kind of thing. And exercise forces you to engage with your body and actually think about it and actually think about how it actually feels. Which again, what happens, you have to stop because you realize the harm it's doing, which she doesn't want. She doesn't want to see. It's terrible.
That the best predictor.
I do think that being fat, it does affect you socially. It does. But I don't think that, especially from very big sizes, it's not a good idea to use that as motivation. It needs to be health. I would even say in smaller sizes, it needs to be health first, because you never want to put your health at the back burner, because that's toxic ritualistic to do that. It should always be the number one of whatever you're doing.
How long a life you will live is based off your social interactions. So if the challenges were truly designed for the intent of health, why do we solely and only focus on physical health? Mental, emotional, relational, there are so many other.
They are connected. That's why. There's your answer.
Types of health promoting behaviors that are just as healthy, and all of those other things that I mentioned could be done and would not potentially trigger any person.
Okay, let me mute it.
You should be afraid as a people, especially if you live in the United States. There is a study that was done. It said that 80% of 10-year-old girls have already been on a diet.
So to her, that means automatic toxic ritualistic. That's why she's so upset about it. Which it's not necessarily true. It just depends, I guess. But the biggest thing is teaching a child to be realistic. Teaching a child that social things are not the reason. You need to focus on your health, stuff like that. Doing something solely for social reasons, that is toxic ritualistic. It should never be solely for social reasons. It doesn't even make sense to do it solely for social reasons, because there are plenty of people, especially when you're in BINGE, who will be upset that you're downsizing. So it doesn't even work.
They reported to be more afraid of becoming fat than they were to cancer, war, or losing both of their parents.
I think it's because they might not be going through certain things like that, or they might not be living in constant danger of the other things. You know, kids think about what's close to them and that kind of thing. You know, if they don't live in like a war-torn country, then they're not going to fear that as much. They're not necessarily going to think about it all the time. You know, most parents aren't going to constantly tell their 10-year-old about, you know, tragedies and wars and things all across the planet every single day. That just usually doesn't happen. But when it comes to weight and stuff, they probably see people that are bigger every single day. Or, you know, maybe there is an issue at school or something like that. And you see that all the time. That's all.
If we as a culture don't get our shit together, we are going to be breeding up a...
So people don't develop it through just culture. This is where she's wrong. It's trauma-based, and I do believe there's a genetic component. So the other thing is, not everybody has it. Like I said, I will keep bringing it up. There is a specific cohort, Gen X women. They had a very high amount of women in that generation that had these issues. But there were probably a lot of socio-political, whatever, a lot of things going on at that time where it was specifically activated in a way that it hasn't happened before or since. So apart from that, it's not that common. And even within that cohort, many Gen X women have already long recovered. So it's not that prevalent today. It does exist, but it's, I don't know if, I'm sure they do have some statistics on it, but it's not like it's 80% of people. That's not true. It's nowhere near that high. Nowhere near. It would probably be, if I had to guess, it would probably be 10% or less. Probably less, probably more like 5%. It exists. It's enough people that it's important. But it's not like every single person has these issues. That's not true. So your average person who's telling you about a 10K step challenge, they're not thinking about it in this way. They're not thinking about it in a toxically ritualistic way. It has nothing to do with that. You cannot act like everybody has these issues. They don't. Most people don't.
We can explore the relationship with food and body and movement and not mean that I am a less valuable person, that I will be discriminated against, that I deserve to be discriminated against. Then sure, do your fucking movement challenge. But if the movement challenge is still somehow rooted in a mobile body is more better, a healthier body is...
Your intention, this is very like, I don't know, it's this weird like pseudo-religious, bizarre philosophy within this where it's like she's judging what you're doing based on how you think about it or something, and it's like it just doesn't work. You don't know what somebody is thinking about unless if they tell you, typically. I mean, unless if they're totally lying or like they're in a toxic ritualistic cycle. But again, there's going to be a lot of signs of that, a lot of physical signs. You can't really hide it that well if people are looking for it. Sorry to burst your bubble. Also not sorry, because I'm here to burst all your toxic ritualistic bubbles. You can't hide it that well. It doesn't actually hide. It's delusional. But I'm telling people that don't have these issues, there's a lot of different signs. For example, look at how she's talking about this, and look at her size, and look at how sustained it's been for how long. That's a warning sign. Those are a lot of signs. It takes a lot to maintain that. There's something going on. You're seeing her reinforce herself through reinforcing others. So I can just tell because as she's talking about it, I can tell because there's physical traits, there's physical reality behind it. It's very obvious she has an issue. But it shows. It does. Especially after a while, it does. Some of them you can hide it better, but it doesn't matter. People pick up on things. I'm not trying to get into specifics, but when people pay attention, they see. They can see it. So the point is, there's going to be stuff going on where you can tell that a 10K step challenge is a part of a bigger picture. If somebody's just acting normal and they tell you about this, it's like, oh my gosh, at least 9 times out of 10, it's just going to be normal. Get a grip. Certainly not diagnostic. I mean, it's ridiculous. Just because that would be your intention, that has nothing to do with that other person's intention. And yeah, if you're using it as a weapon against yourself, that's terrible. That would be a horrible thing to do. But most people aren't.
Better, a person in a smaller body is better. And then we are hiding it under the guise of health. I'll go with the belief that this question...
That is stupid. It is so dumb. I think I've broken down how dumb it is throughout most of this, so I don't have to keep saying it. That is not true. That's all I can say. Refer to the rest of the video.
It was asked in good faith. There is nothing wrong with wanting...
But it bothered you. It triggered you. So you had to say this.
to improve or add more movement. But if your movement is tied to your self-worth,
you can't necessarily assume that. And there's more to it than that. And you know there is. You should know. You should know diagnostic criteria. There's more to it than that. Somebody feeling some kind of way about themselves, that's not enough for it to be toxic ritualistic. There's behaviors. Behavior. It isn't just a feeling. Yes, there are thoughts. And yes, there are other aspects to it, of course. But guess what? If you're not doing the stuff, if you're not BINGing, if you're not being overly reductive, if you're not staring at the mirror for 2 hours and shit like that, you don't have it. Those are behaviors. Those are actions. Your feelings are not enough for it to be a problem. You could have a different issue. You could just be anxious out of your mind. I don't know. There's so many things people could have. But you don't have that. It requires behaviors. They have to be happening often enough, for long enough, blah, blah, blah. But there's actions being taken. And yes, obsessing is an action. So having a moment of, I just don't feel that great about myself today. I think I want to do a 10,000K step challenge. That has nothing to do with toxic ritualistic. It doesn't even have anything to do with consumption. Yes, something like that could serve one. It could serve a toxic ritualistic behavior. But in and of itself is not one at all. And like I told you guys, there'd be so many other aspects going on, so many spinning plates, that 10K challenge is just one of the plates being spun. Typically people within BINGE, they use exercise as a weapon. So it's, I'm fine because I can do this challenge, or I failed this challenge, so I feel horrible about myself, so now I can BING. It's that type of thing. But it goes back to, it all goes back to that.
Esteem or your value to this world, as well as your health status or your body size, I'd argue that your step challenge isn't healthy.
No. Just no. I think I told you guys what conditions it would have to be like very unhealthy. It'd be like I said, within that context of the 3 behaviors. So if it's, I'm doing this to specifically fail, or I'm doing this as a part of a reductive cycle so that I can then BINGE later, or I'm doing this to justify a BINGE, or I'm doing this because I want to, hide what I'm doing. There's a lot of stuff that it would be used for. But like I said, there would be all these other signs. So, and it's typically not going to be the case. At least 9 out of 10, it's not the case. So just stop. Stupid. I will talk to you guys again later. Have a good one. Bye.